Wait a minute, you're telling me there's a Torah scroll written by Miriam of the Benayahu family, a woman scribe that was used in Yemen in the National Library of Israel. Wait, so if there's no colophon, how do they know she wrote it? Shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices. I'm Nehemia Gordon, and I'm here today with the female scribe, the Soferet, Aviella Barclay. Shalom, Aviella.
Shalom, Nehemia.
So you actually work as a scribe, and which is somewhat unusual to be a woman who's working as a scribe, but it's becoming more common these days, isn't it?
It is becoming more common, yeah. I mean, we do have records of there being historical sofrot, so female scribes that did ritual items like Torah scrolls and tefillin.
I didn't know about that. Tell me that. What I did know about is there were female scribes who wrote regular manuscripts. Like there's a famous one from, I believe she's from France or something, called Paula HaSoferet, Paula the Scribe.
Oh, right, yeah.
I did a course at Oxford, and they brought out this manuscript, and it was like a commentary on the Talmud, like some really obscure text. Like
I've seen that really intense writing.
Well,
it's
it's a text that the
consistent.
Average male Jew would not understand.
No,
because it's a very complicated subject matter.
Yeah,
and there's no way you can write something, copy something like that unless you understand it. And her father was a scribe, and he trained her.
That's
and she wrote it.
Yeah, that's how a lot of historical sofrot became sofrot. I mean,
and Sofrim, right? Their father.
Well, yes,
them,
exactly.
Right?
Well, I mean, one good example is in Yemen. There was a whole family of scribes, the Benayahu family.
Okay, I know them.
And right.
I mean, I know the manuscripts written by the Benayahu
Right,
family.
exactly. So I mean, and it was a family, and they'd been scribes for multiple generations, and there was a daughter named Miriam. And she was also taught to be a Soferet, just like her brothers were taught to be Sofrim, you know.
Okay.
And she wrote colophons, and she wrote codices, but according to a couple of the bookbinders and artists and scribes and people that I know in Jerusalem, she has a Torah scroll that is in the Israel National Library.
Really?
Yeah, and she lived in the 1500s.
Wait a minute, you're telling me there's a Torah scroll written by Miriam of the Benayahu family, a woman scribe that was used in Yemen in the National Library of Israel. Wait, so if there's no colophon, how do they know she wrote it? From the handwriting, or?
That was referenced in Evan Sapir, which was a book written by, there was a rabbi, he was an Ashkenazi rabbi that decided he was going to leave Jerusalem and go collect money all over the world, all over the Jewish world for the poor of Jerusalem. And he ended up in Yemen, and he wrote this whole book. And it's a really interesting book. You should read it. I mean, it's in English as well. So he referenced it there. And there was also multiple, like I said, I know people who've seen it, but I haven't seen it myself.
So he mentions in this book that he's around at the time of Miriam the scribe, and is that what it is?
No, that was later on. No, he was late. Yeah, he was later on. I can't.
Okay.
I'm really sorry. I can't off the top of my head. I can't remember the name of the rabbi, but it was 1500s.
Okay. Well, and this is very common that there were these emissaries that would go out from Jerusalem, and they would collect money on behalf of the Jews of Israel.
I think that's really brave. And also at the time, you'd literally be walking or traveling around with loads of cash on you. Like, how is that safe?
Well, I mean,
when you consider
traveling without the cash wasn't safe.
No,
I mean,
traveling wasn't safe.
Traveling was so unsafe that there's a traditional Jewish prayer, Tfilat HaDerech, the prayer of the traveling. And I remember when I was a kid, I was raised Orthodox, and we would recite this when we would drive down to the Indiana Dunes. And my father would say, okay, we've got to recite Tfilat HaDerech, the prayer for traveling. And I'm like, what, armed robbers and bandits? What is this about? What do we need to do this? But you know what? There's a lot of places in the world today that aren't that safe to travel. And boy, back then, any kind of travel was you were taking your life in your hands.
You really were.
So,
you might not come home again.
So this guy, he comes from Jerusalem, and he arrives in Yemen, and he finds out there's a Torah scroll written by Miriam the scribe. And you're saying it's in the national. I've got to hunt this down now and find out what is this Torah scroll.
Good, because if I've got any incorrect information from any of my sources, then obviously that would need to be corrected.
Yeah.
But this is exciting to me. But she's not even the first one, because there was. I mean, there's been female scribes all over the place. I mean, there was. There's a long list of them. A lot of Italian female scribes, mostly writing Megillat Esther, as far as we know, and decorating them, of course, because it's Italy, so you have to decorate things.
And you're allowed to decorate a scroll of Esther, but you're not allowed to decorate a Torah scroll.
That's
right?
correct. Yeah.
Unless you call like the Sefer Tagim that we talked about decoration, but not.
That's not the same as decoration.
No,
I'm talking about like illustration and like putting.
Oh, like actual drawings, yeah.
Yeah, drawings or even.
And is that kosher to read from in a synagogue if it has those drawings?
Oh yeah, that doesn't. Yeah, no, a lot of Megillot Esther are. It depends on how much money the future owner wants to spend on it, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, they're absolutely kosher to read from. You can Yotze, the entire community, the whole community is included. Whoever hears it read will be included in the mitzvah, in the commandment. They would have completed their mitzvah.
So have you done Esther scrolls where they were decorated as well?
Yes, I've done multiple ones of those. I mean, probably the most elaborate one I've ever done. I mean, I did one actually just a few years ago for Rabbi Lindsay Taylor Goodhart's, Dr. Lindsay Taylor Goodhart's, who also went through the Maharat program. So she's essentially an Orthodox rabbi as well.
I don't know what that is.
Maharat program?
What's that?
Oh, it's essentially an Orthodox rabbinical program for women.
Really?
Yeah, it's out of HIR. And
which is Hebrew. What is HIR?
The Riverdale Hebrew Institute, Riverdale, Rabbi Avi Weiss, and So there's all kinds of names that are not coming to me now, and I'm going to say the wrong thing now, and then people write to you and me and say that's not true.
No, I get that all the time.
I can't remember. Yeah, but I don't like it. I don't want to get it.
I get that. Where like well, look. I mean, I
want to be really responsible about what I've said.
I also do like hundreds of hours. Probably a year of recording, and I'll say, as it says in Psalm 22, and someone will write in, Nehemia, that liar, he's trying to deceive people. It's not Psalm 82, it's Psalm 28. And I switch the numbers or something.
Yeah. So, but they won't be nice about you just making a mistake, transposing numbers, right?
Of course I did that so that people would be deceived, because it couldn't be I possibly just made a mistake.
No, exactly. That's impossible.
So, all right. So there's
kind of like a scribal error.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I forget what it was, but there was something we were exchanging text messages to organize this. And you had a scribal error. Yeah. I forget what it was, or maybe I did, where we like transposed the numbers of the time or something. I don't remember what it was. And I'm like, here's a scribal error.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
A modern scribal error in WhatsApp. Exactly. So there's a rabbinical training program for women.
Yeah.
In Orthodox Judaism.
Yeah.
Is that accepted by most Orthodox Jews?
It's a ongoing conversation.
Okay.
I mean,
that sounds like a different podcast.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And better you should talk to someone who's actually been through the program. Okay. And there are many women in the United States and Britain and Israel and actually all over the world, because it's been ongoing. I think the first graduate of the program, Sarah Hurwitz. I think that was about 15 years ago. So there's been quite a few intakes since then.
Wow. Okay.
So
all right. So you've done scrolls of Esther that are decorated, because you also do art. Tell us about your art.
So the most elaborate one I did, actually, I based I did in between all of the columns and the beginning and the end, the chelik, the pieces of parchment at the beginning and the end. I did everything based on the archaeological findings in the Louvre and here in the British Museum that they had taken from the palace at Shushan, right? The palace of Susa.
Wow.
Because that's the palace where
that's cool.
Was supposed to have happened, right? The story of Esther.
Right.
Shushan Habira, right? Like the city of Susa, of Shushan.
Right.
So the beginning, I have like Achashverosh, right? The king, and I've got some attendant boys behind him with the feather fans and everything. And it's all based on actual like statues and bas relief and things like that.
Oh, wow.
And then the whole thing in between the columns and all along the top and bottom were all like the tiles. So I used gouache, which is a traditional water-based paint that's basically pigment and binder. And that's very common to be used in manuscripts, gouache, from hundreds hundreds of years ago they were using gouache, and the color stays the same. And
Okay.
so I did that, and I copied all the tile designs that they found in Shushan, and I copied all the, and I did color matching and everything. So it was in this particular color palette, with the kind of technology they had for like firing tiles and glazes and things at the time. So I did that, and then at the end I had Esther and Mordecai in the garden, like reclining and having a little libation and under the stars and everything.
Wow.
And I obviously also did gold leaf. And it was all very Babylonian and all very period.
That's pretty cool.
There's actually it's in Ontario now that a family sponsored that, and now it's in a synagogue in Ontario.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it was fun. It took a long time though.
Wow. How long does it take you to write a scroll of Esther, and then how long to, in addition to that, decorate it?
Well, it depends on the decorations. The one I wrote for Lindsay Taylor Goodhart's has a different kind of crown at the top of each of the columns, with the exception of the Aseret B'nai Haman, the 10 sons of Haman in the story, because that one is they're all the baddies. Here, I'll just find.
Has a special layout.
It has a special layout, as you can see there. So I didn't put a crown up there. I put it at the top of every other column.
Crown?
Oh, I literally illustrated a crown.
Like a crown, like worn at a head.
Yes.
Not like crowns like we talk about in the letters. Like
no, not tagine.
Okay.
Yeah, not it's more like an atara, a crown.
Okay.
But the crowns were all based again on period, sort of like Achaemenid, like Persian Empire crowns. So
cool.
their theme tended to be like chrysanthemums and daisies and different kinds of flowers, and particular shapes, like this sort of these architectural. And they were worn by kings and queens and princes and, different idols and things like that. People who in Zoroastrian religion was maybe considered gods or goddesses, or in like the previous pagan religion. So I used all of those because that's the time period that it occurred in. And I thought to put a European crown there, would be a bit like,
That's interesting. So a lot of the scrolls of Esther I've seen from I don't know if they're technically from the Middle Ages, right? Because there might be 16th, 17th century.
Yeah.
But they're the Italian ones with all the decorations. And you see these like European courtiers.
Right.
And you're like, wait a minute, that guy could be in a Shakespeare play. That doesn't look like somebody from the time of
but
Haman and Esther.
They had no way of knowing, though, did they?
Right.
Because they didn't have all the archaeological evidence that we have now.
Cool. So you've taken the fruits of this historical investigation that's taken place over the last few centuries and put it into a modern Jewish ritual like artifact. That's incredible. That's
what
really
can I
cool.
say? I love my research.
That's very cool.
I love my research.
That's a very cool thing to do. Wow.
So that's a simpler way of doing it, where you might just put one crown, because that's one of the traditional ways of illustrating it. Just put a crown, something like that, very simple. Or it can be fully like full color painted. I mean, the parchment's an amazing material. It can take a lot of art supplies, basically.
I saw a scroll of Esther where every time the word Esther appeared, she had a crown. Meaning the word Esther had a crown on top of it.
Nice, yeah.
Which I'm like, I didn't know you were allowed to do that, but I mean, I guess.
I do a special thing with Vashti, actually.
Oh, what do you do with Vashti?
Well, there's all kinds of different ways that, according to Sefer Tagin, you could write. There's different kinds of crowns that you could write
on Vashti
onto the different letters of Vashti, different variations. And because I think Vashti gets demonized and bullied and and she basically she knows who she is and she stands up for herself, and I think she's sometimes forgotten. She's in a lot of traditions, she's sort of, oh, Vashti, like we didn't like her anyway, so it doesn't matter kind of thing. But I think she sets a very good example, by saying, no, I'm not going to be humiliated. I'm not going to have someone cross my boundaries like that. So no. And so I think she deserves to be recognized and decorated and admired for that as well. Just because she doesn't end up being the heroine of the story, and she's not, the savior of the Jewish people the way Esther is, then, she's still done the right thing though.
But even on like the pshat level, the plain level, she's not a bad character, right?
No, not at all.
Like in other words, I think there's this like thought that making Vashti into a heroine is this revisionism.
No, I don't think she's a heroine. I just think that she stood up for herself and said no because it was an unreasonable request. It was humiliating.
Yeah. Well, the question is, what exactly was the request? Meaning, there's one. Well, I mean, you tell. What was the request that was unreasonable?
I feel much more comfortable when I can like quote things.
Okay.
Because if I paraphrase in this case,
because one interpretation
really
of
wrong.
the story. So Achashverosh, Ahasuerus, or however it's pronounced in English.
I don't bother pronouncing it in English.
Ahashverosh is
Xerxes.
He demands that she appear before him and during his drunken stupor party.
Yep.
And one version or one interpretation of that is he demands that he appear before all of his friends naked, and that certainly is an unreasonable request.
It is.
And in that case,
it doesn't say naked in the scroll.
No, it doesn't. I'm saying that's one interpretation.
Yes.
Meaning the question is, just show up. What's the problem? Your husband asks you to show up and show your beauty to his friends.
Because they're having a little locker room talk.
Okay.
Right.
That's not in the scroll either, right?
No. But it's like, why show off what your wife looks like to a giant room full of drunken men? Is that a really good situation to put your wife into?
Yeah, that probably isn't going
Is that a room that any woman wants to walk into?
Right.
Doesn't matter whether it's nowadays or back then. I mean,
and there was definitely a theme in the scroll of Esther where this is one big drunken stupor. It's such a big drunken stupor. He's like, I'm not going to even rule this kingdom. Who's the highest bidder? I'll just give him my signet ring.
Right.
And then he gives it to Haman.
Yep.
And
boo.
You know, how would have history turned out differently? You know, if in so many different periods if alcohol wasn't involved.
It's very funny how there's like so much drinking on almost every page.
No, it's a central theme there.
Yeah.
And he obviously...
And it goes on for a long period of time, actually.
Right.
It's not just a weekend. It's not, the story doesn't take place over a week or two. I mean, it takes place over like many months. Yeah.
And even on the plain level of the text, he sobers up the next day and he's like, oh, what did I do?
Yeah.
I banished her, or in one interpretation, he executed her, but it doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that either.
He just deposed her.
Yeah.
And he's sobered up and he's like, well, this was, now what do I do?
Oops.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's interesting. So you're talking about female scribes, and you said there are other examples from history.
Right, yeah. And also there was a prince in Tawuk or Dakuk, which is in Persia.
Okay.
And he was always referred to as Ben HaSoferet.
The son of the female scribe.
Right. And so his lineage, so nothing about his dad. Like they weren't saying anything about his dad. They were just referring to that. But yeah, and there was some Rebbitzin Dulce of Worms, who was the wife of the Rokeach of Rav Eliezer of Worms in the during the
early 13th century
Crusader times, because unfortunately she and two of her daughters were murdered by Crusaders.
Okay.
She used to sew the Yuriot of the Sifrei Torah together.
Okay, the sheets. She
would sew them together. She would sew them together. Yeah. So I don't know if she did anything else, but I mean, that's just an example of there are places where there's many different places where it'll say, oh, don't let a woman write this, or don't let a woman sew that, and if she has, then maybe unpick it and resew it, but maybe. And then another opinion will say maybe not. You know, it'll say something else. I mean, I'm being very like.
So this is really interesting. She sewed together the sheets of the Torah Scroll. So you know what it implies, that she was literate. Because how would you know which sheet to sew to which other sheet unless you read what it said?
I suppose. In theory, I suppose her husband could have said, oh, can you sew this one to that one? You could make that argument.
Yeah, it's possible, but...
But when you consider what a big rabbi he was, and the fact that his rulings and his influenced basically all of Ashkenazi Jewry, even to today, you know, he's a very important rabbi. So I mean, his wife was doing that.
He's one of the key figures of really medieval mysticism. He wrote a series of books. One of the more famous ones is, what is it called? Sodei Razaya. And that's actually a collection of a bunch of works. Basically the secrets of the mysteries, or something like that, is the translation. Yeah, so he is one of the key authors of medieval mysticism, and all kinds of other works. And yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know. So his wife sewed Torah scrolls together, the pieces of the scroll. One of the things about the Torah scrolls, there aren't catchwords. So in a colophon, or excuse me, in a codex, you'll have a quire, which is basically like a little notebook.
Right. Yeah.
And there'll be the first word of the next quire.
Yes.
So all you have to be able to do is read that word and not all of the context to figure out what goes with what.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Torah scrolls, with the exception of the Bologna scroll, we don't have catchwords.
Yeah.
And so if you want to know which goes to which, you'll have to okay, read this verse. All right. Oh yeah, this lines up here. Right.
Yeah. And you've got your tikkun, obviously, to show you what goes with what.
So you think she could have been checking a tikkun? I suppose it's possible.
It's possible.
Or other Torah scrolls?
That was pre-printing press, obviously. So it's more likely back then that people were copying from other Torah scrolls.
No, but they had tikkuns. We have a tikkun from.
Yeah, but they would have had to have been handwritten.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So we have a tikkun from what is it? I believe it's in Hamburg, and it is the exact layout of several Torah scrolls we have that are today in Berlin.
Yeah.
And it's almost certain that either they were copied. Well, it is certain that they were either copied from that tikkun or they were both copied from a common source. That's always the question, right?
Right. Yeah.
In whenever you have A and B, was A copied from B? Was B copied from A? Or were they both copied from C?
Right.
Right. That's always the question. But there's no question that this tikkun matches at least two Torah scrolls in the layout. In the layout, meaning of how each column begins.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's really interesting. I did not know that.
So we have,
and that's your field. It's not mine.
So we have tikkunei sofrim that are handwritten.
That's one of the advantages of a codex, and that is one of the ways that it can be an improvement in technology. But it really depends on Well, it depends on what you're using the words for. It depends on whether you're traveling with it. It depends on whether you're holding it in your hand when you're reading it, or whether you're putting it on a table to read it. It depends on whether it's public or private. I mean, the Torah scroll we have now, which is the 5 books of Moses, right? I mean, it used to be 5 separate books of Moses, and they used to, people would have been able to. It used to be more democratized in that people used to be able to potentially afford it or write their own if they were literate enough because they were smaller. And then it was only later on in Jewish history that the rabbis decided, oh no, we're gonna sew them all together and we're gonna have them in the synagogue, and then everyone will have to come there to hear it. And it's so big that your average person can't afford it, and it's so big that you generally can't travel with it. I mean, again, because it's handmade, you can make them quite small. I mean, there's many small ones out there that are literally the writing is like a mezuzah, tiny, tiny, tiny.
Right.
But
I've seen ones where the writing's much smaller
than that. Yeah, so have I.
Yeah.
I mean, they're unusual, but yes,
they're
very
kind of
easy to do hagba.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because hagba is where you lift up the scroll.
That's right, and you show it to
synagogue.
everyone. This is the Torah.
So there's a scroll in Berlin, which I've been told, I haven't lifted it up myself. I've seen it, but I didn't weigh it. I'm told it weighs 60 kilos, which is about 120 pounds. So how on earth it couldn't have been one person. It had to be at least 2 people, I would think, to lift that thing.
It's kind of dangerous, though.
Yeah, you'd think it would rip because...
well, it depends on how much tension you put it under.
Yeah.
And how it's sewn together.
You'd have to be really careful to...
Be careful.
Yeah. Well, and Mark mentioned, I think in the program we did together, series of programs, that a lot of the scrolls he's repaired are when somebody did hagba.
Hagba accidents.
And it ripped.
Yeah. Either a hagba accident, or sometimes some synagogues for Simchat Torah will unroll. There'll either be a Simchat Torah accident, potentially as well, where we take them all out and we do hakafot. We dance around the synagogue with them. And you can sometimes have an accident then if you're not careful. And also, sometimes some synagogues like to unroll the entire Sefer Torah all around the entire inside of the synagogue and have everyone hold on to it at the top.
Okay,
and see the whole thing.
We have to talk about this. So there was an incident. It must have been about 10 years ago, where there was this Christian pastor who had some kind of a scandal, and I don't even know the details. I was gonna say I don't remember the details.
Let's not gossip.
But no. Here's the part that's important.
Yeah.
So when he came back to his out of exile, let's call it that.
Right.
He brought in a Messianic Jewish rabbi, who took out a Torah scroll, unrolled it, and wrapped this Christian pastor in the Torah Scroll. And this became an international scandal because they were touching the Torah Scroll with their hands, right? You had people who were holding it, and it was this international scandal. It's cultural appropriation, which I don't entirely disagree with. It's desecrating the Torah Scroll, which I don't entirely disagree with. But it's something Jews don't do. And Jews do that. That was just a lie.
No, Jews don't wrap another human being in the Torah Scroll.
No, they
though.
don't. But they do unravel an entire Torah Scroll, and they have people hold on to it, and they have them touch it with their bare hands. And
You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, but you just described how they're holding it, right?
So this is only something that started happening with. It really only started happening with sort of the baby boomer generation, with the Jewish catalog generation and the Pnei Or movement.
Jewish catalog generation? I don't know what that is.
There's like the first, second, and third Jewish catalog, and they were
never heard of it.
They first started writing them, I believe, in sort of 1968, 70, something like that. It was basically Jews who were of the baby boomer generation who felt dissatisfied with, and they didn't feel like they connected well with their parents' Judaism.
Okay.
And that's fair. Every generation makes decisions like that for itself, right?
Yeah, sure.
I'm a Gen Xer. We did things differently too. So,
Okay.
and now we have more generations who do things differently.
Okay.
That's just how it goes.
So what was the catalog?
So the catalogs, well, they collected lots of different things.
Uh-huh.
And they illustrated it themselves, and they wrote in it, and there's a bit on scribal arts in the first Jewish catalog. There's a bit on, different creative ways of making different Jewish rituals meaningful. Because a lot of people, if they had like a very American identity, and maybe they had become divorced from their tribal Jewish heritage and their religious affiliation and everything, then they didn't necessarily find it meaningful, because all that was left was the ritual, and because the meaning hadn't been passed down to everybody, it was sort of hollow for them. So they were trying to reclaim it. I mean, as you know, a lot of people of that generation changed religion, and that was at a time when a lot of people, that's the first generation really where it was becoming sort of like not unheard of for people to change religions, to convert to different religions, right? Now it's very common. So they wanted to reconnect with their Judaism. So they did this, and it was amazing. So many people have benefited from the Jewish catalogs. So many of them.
I have to learn more about this. I've literally never heard of it.
Oh, they're so good. Like they're also
are they books? What are they?
They're books. They're like this big, and when you see them, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's very like late 60s, early 70s.
And it's a catalog of what? Of practices?
Just loads of every single catalog.
Like the Sears
they were like,
catalog.
let's learn about this stuff and put that in. And then everyone was like, this is amazing. Oh, okay. Well, let's learn about more stuff and put that in. And that's why there's 3 of them, and with an index and everything. And they helped that generation and subsequent generations, actually, because, of Jews reconnect with their Judaism and understand it better. And then it inspired so many people to actually learn more and reconnect. And if this was the beginning, the seeding of their reconnection, then they could find their own way.
Okay.
So.
And they described this unraveling of the Torah Scroll?
No.
Or what was
Not that I recall. There's 3 catalogs. I can't remember everything that's in it.
Okay, what was your point?
My point is that is something that didn't used to happen. And then I
agree, it didn't happen 100 years ago.
If I'm not mistaken, it started happening with either the rabbis or the followers of the rabbis associated with sort of Pnei Or in the Jewish renewal movement, like Reb Zalman
Jewish
Schachter,
renewal is definitely
Shlomi, and who was a lovely man, by the way, may he rest in peace. Also a sofer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he gave me advice actually about spacing, which I appreciate.
Spacing words, or
well, he said,
what does that mean, spacing?
and not every sofer or soferet will agree with this, but he said that when you write a pasuk, a sentence, he said, there are rules about how much space you put in between words and how much space you put in between letters. But he said, but at the end of the pasuk, at the end of the sentence, just add a little tiny bit more space. Don't put the exact amount of space that you would between words. Because that way, when the person is reading it, their brain will register the very slight wider space. Don't make it 2 spaces, because that's not allowed. the very slight, just like 1.5, 1.25 spaces, because the eye and the brain will still see that. And then then it'll be easier for them to go, that's the end. And then if they're chanting it, then it just makes it easier for them to read and to serve the community.
That's one of the characteristics of medieval Ashkenazi Torah scrolls.
I have seen those. They actually have quite big spaces sometimes.
Very big spaces.
Yeah, like definitely 2 or more spaces.
Oh, there's no question that they're, well, they want to make sure it's not a parasha stuma,
right.
Close.
Yeah, but you have to have quite a few letters for that.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, but there's a distinctive space, and by the way, they did it in mezuzahs as well.
Yeah.
And it was done up until the 19th century and possibly even the 20th century. It's not just in the Middle East.
No, I was going to say I've seen one from 1790 that definitely had really wide spaces.
And I've seen
that was from Germany.
And I've seen it in 13th century Torah scrolls.
Really?
So
I'm not surprised.
It's a distinctive Ashkenazi practice to put spaces between verses.
Right.
In Italian Torah scrolls, they actually put a dot between verses, and then which is definitely forbidden in Masechet Sofrim. And then somebody would often come along and erase all the dots.
Right.
And you'll see these Torah scrolls where like there's a scratch off after every verse.
Wow.
And sometimes they missed it, and you can still see, but it's obviously a scratch off in the shape of a dot. So,
but originally, I mean, the Egyptians used to put a dot in between all the words. Because that's before we invented spaces.
In Paleo-Hebrew, they did that.
Exactly.
Sure.
So that's where I was going with that.
Like in the...
we used to put a dot in between every single word because nobody... So there's this midrash, there's this idea that the Torah, when Moses wrote the Torah and God was dictating the Torah to Moses, that he just wrote it as one long utterance, one long sentence.
And
there were no spaces. That's right. Yeah. And so you think, this sounds a bit mystical and like some kind of mythological thing, and the story goes on, but really, if you understand like the history of writing, you go, but there wouldn't have been any spaces actually, because we didn't invent spaces
No, but there
first.
were dot dividers between the words.
There were dot dividers, but that didn't take up a whole space.
And then sometimes you had 2 words that were together, and so it'd be like, et haaretz.
Yeah.
And that's not an actual example, but if you look at, for example, in the Siloam inscription, or the Lachish letters, it's very common that when you have a small word, that word is attached to the following word. And we have that represented in the Masoretic text with the makaf, with the hyphen, or essentially 2 words for the purposes of the accents of the trup. Mm-hmm. The ta'amim are treated as 1 word, and that may reflect these dots that were word dividers. That, by the way, the Samaritans still do that. They divide the words.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Dots.
Yeah.
But you have that in the Lachish letters and the Arad letters. You have it in the Siloam inscription.
It was normal.
You have it in the Mesha, which isn't Hebrew, it's Moabite, but it's basically the same language.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to this unrolling of the Torah scroll.
Right. So I mean, people. So that is it's a beautiful way for people to connect with the Torah scroll.
So here's what
and it means a lot to them.
Yeah.
And their hearts are very full.
Right.
And that is an important thing. Whatever religion or group you're going to be a part of, your heart has to be in it. Like it has to be, you have to have a sense of belonging. And there are many ways of doing that. But when you think about the laws and the halachot, they're not just there to keep things separate or apart or mysterious. That being said, sometimes it's appropriate for things to be separate and apart and mysterious because that's part of how it has its value. People don't understand how to treat parchment. They don't know that even if your hands are clean, if you touch that, then in 50 years, your fingerprints are going to show up on it, and it will cause damage because there's always acids in your fingers. That's why, you always have to work with like paper down and sleeves, and you have to be very careful. And some scribes work with gloves on,
That's very controversial today because
of the change in the haptic feedback.
So basically the belief in most libraries that I've gone to with medieval manuscripts is if you have gloves on, you're going to cause more damage than if you don't.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the dexterity to turn the pages, and then Torah scrolls aren't pages. But
No.
still, I can think of 2, maybe 3 libraries that I've ever been to that asked me to put on gloves. And every other place said, no, you're not allowed to put on gloves.
To. Because like you say, because you don't have that haptic feedback. You can't feel the pages the same way because it's like very early on, like I was writing a Torah scroll and the place that I was writing wasn't heated because someone was offering like this attic space for me to work in. So So I wore gloves, but then of course I couldn't feel the quill properly, really. So then I ended up using gloves that had no fingers in them, it was like the fingertips were not there. And then I realized that, they're a little bit too fuzzy because the tiny bit of fuzz that was really microscopic was dragging through the fresh ink because I'm right-handed. So I was like, okay, can't use these either. I mean, again, luckily God's name was not involved.
Okay.
But
wow. Show it. You were going to demonstrate some things for us.
Okay.
Is that your Kesed HaSofer?
Yeah, sort of. Well, I mean, that is really, but yeah. I've actually
could
got
also
one.
mean a bag.
Yeah, I've got one. I've got like a bronze
Oh,
or a
nice.
brass. Yeah, it's amazing.
So what are we doing here?
Well, I thought I would just try and write some letters. If that's all right with you.
Oh, that's great.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
I didn't cut this very well, actually. It's not behaving the way.
And this is a goose feather?
This is goose. It's not turkey. I actually prefer turkey.
I heard that turkey is the best.
Oh yeah, this is not to stay in the recording. I'm making very bad letters with this.
So I heard turkey is the best quill. Is that?
Ugh, okay, yeah, no, you're not keeping that. Here, I've got some here. I prefer turkey because the feather is really thick, and the thing is that, I mean, I should have brought a bigger one as well. The thing is that you see all these surgical scars.
Okay.
So my hand got crushed.
Oh no.
No, it's part of my sofrut journey. It's fine, it turns out. But so that's why I used to be a gemologist, and then I stopped being a gemologist because I couldn't handle tweezers anymore because my hand was crushed in a car accident.
Oh no.
And I had to have my hand put back together.
Oh, wow. Well, that's good. That was put back together.
So, now she's faster, stronger, better. We have the
bionic
technology. Right, exactly. So, no, that's terrible. So that's
Can you tell us what all these tools are?
Well, yeah. Well, these are just different kinds of coolnesses, right? Like
No,
these are
but
just
what's
different.
this? That's not a coolmoose, is it?
It is. Well, I mean, this is one that's
What?
usually, I forget the name
Is
of
that
this.
metal?
No, it's not. This is a particular kind of wood. I think it's ebony or something. This is.
Oh,
I got this
wow.
from an Arabic calligrapher supply store.
Oh, wow.
Because you get different. I'm going to use this one.
Now, would you be allowed to write a Torah scroll with this?
Yeah, you absolutely can because it's wood. You know,
Okay.
I mean,
Just not metal.
well, and there's a lot of scribes today that will use like metal pens that are basically like fountain pens,
Okay.
so they don't have to dip as much,
Okay.
and so they can write faster, so that they can get the Torah scrolls written
So
faster.
they are allowed to do that?
Only one authority, which was Gansfried, said that was okay. No one else says it's okay.
Are there Orthodox scribes who do that?
Yeah,
Really?
and I shouldn't have that disparaging tone in my voice because I shouldn't really judge them.
Okay.
But to me, it's a completely different thing. That's why they have to go. So they have to go through and put all the tugging on like later on with like basically like a little like art pen, like a felt pen kind of thing, because you can't make tugging with these pens, these metal pens that are basically like for writing, like for just
Because they're not
fancy
fine
writing.
enough? Is that why?
They're not fine enough, but also you don't get the same like snap. You don't get the same flexibility, and you can't make it as thin, and you don't get the same snap to it. You can't use the spitz to make a proper letter. But economically, I don't judge them at all because see, this is so much better. Look at that.
So while you're doing this, talk about.
I still made the nose too short, though. Still an unacceptable letter.
Tell us why a robot can't do this.
A robot has no kavanah.
So as you're writing for a Torah scroll,
That's also not going on.
you have to have some level of intent, which a robot can't form.
Yes, you have to have intention about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you have to have in mind, like it's a mitzvah, right? Like you don't, even though it's considered, depending on the list, it's the 613th mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah. You don't make a blessing over a Torah scroll before you start writing it, but you do because it's a long process. This is another like argument as to why women should be able to do it is because it's not really time bound, is it? And also women are potential teachers of Torah, and that's actually what a Torah scroll is for, is to teach Torah.
Oh,
So
okay.
But again, it depends on which authority that you're going to listen to.
Okay.
So try again.
There's a type of inscription we see in medieval manuscripts and codices where somebody comes along and
There
writes,
we go. That's better.
Nisiti hakulmus. And they write it over.
Nisiti.
I tried the pen. I tried the pen. I
Yeah.
tried the pen. And they'll write it over and over. And it's usually like in the flyleaf in the back page, the back blank page. Uh-oh.
Okay, well,
I guess that's the problem with wood.
it can be, yes. I didn't think I was being that tough on it. I was just being intense like I am. Okay, well, I've got one left. It's fine.
And tell us what the plastic one is.
Well, the plastic one I really just got to experiment myself with art. As you can see, it's been stained red. I've never used this for sofrut. In fact, I've never used any of these for sofrut because I was trained on a feather. And I may be biased, but that's one of the reasons why Ashkenazi lettering looks different than Sephardi and Mizrahi and all the other lettering, Yemenite lettering, because the tools are different. And so each tool lends itself to different letter shapes and different sort of like angles and things like that. So I have collected these because I'm an aficionado, and I also care very much about different scribal practice. And I also actually loan these out to people when I go and teach, and they, I said, "Do you want to try these? Do you want to try feathers?" And then they can see how hard it is actually, and that So this I've only ever
used. What would you even do with that?
This, you dip it in ink or paint or whatever, and you can still use it as a stylus. You can use it as basically a brush, or you can do like large letters. But I would only do this if it was like big calligraphy, as it were. I would never use this on because one of the things that is a concern if you use metal or like this is basically acrylic, this plastic. Is that it will imprint, and that is actually another one of the rules, is that you're not allowed to like stamp in or imprint in any of the letters. They have to be written. So sorry, it took me like 3 olives to actually make a good olive.
No,
you see, but I changed styluses, right? Like I cut this earlier, but actually the slit down the center is off center. So so it's, one of my mentors, he, who obviously will remain nameless because he confided in me and Mark. He was like, "I'm not very good at cutting quills." And it's like, oh, wow, okay. That sucks. So he said he has to work really, really hard and cut them many, many, many times until he finally gets a good one. So he spends a large proportion of his time actually like making the tool correct so that he can actually make the right letters.
What do you do with the razor? Is that to erase letters and also to cut the quill?
This. So
no,
this.
I meant this thing.
Oh, this. Oh, this is literally like a quill knife.
Okay, that's to cut a quill.
Yeah, you can use it to cut a quill. It's got a blade here and it's got a blade here. So this is actually really more of a European tool. Because I don't know if you grew up calling like those little flip knives, right? Like a pocket knife.
Yeah.
Did you grow up calling it a pen knife?
I've heard that term.
Okay, well that's why. Because all small knives, especially ones that folded and went in your pocket, that was so that you could cut your pen. Because
I didn't know that. That's so
everyone
cool.
and everyone who was literate knew how to make a pen.
Wow.
Because you would make it out of
You'd grab a feather
usually.
and you'd make it. Wow. Yep. I didn't know that.
That's why it's called a pen knife.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And you can actually get them. You can get like Victorian ones and even older, like in like auction sites or eBay or whatever. And sometimes they're sterling silver, sometimes they're wood. It depends on how wealthy, right? And they have different size knives, and sometimes they have like a little tool to pull out. It's like a corkscrew kind of a tool to pull out all of the sort of like the stuff that's inside the feather. I can't remember what it's called. There's like lots of sort of little compartments in there that you have to pull out when you're cutting it, so that the ink doesn't end up getting caught in any of them and then blobbing out later on.
Ooh.
Yeah. So so it'll have 2 different size knives, and but this I used to actually make the slit down the center.
Okay.
And you can only use it once. Like you can only use one spot once.
Did you make this ink, or you bought the ink? How does it work?
This is ink that I bought, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Do you ever make ink?
I do. I forage for it.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Tell me what.
I go foraging on my own sometimes, but I also go foraging with my good friend and neighbor Jouman Medlej, who is a Lebanese calligrapher who does Arabic calligraphy.
What do you
and she's an artist, and we forage for things like gall nuts.
You find gallnuts here in England?
I have got a pile. Oh, I should have brought some.
Oh, I would
I
love
knew
that,
I'd
yeah.
forgotten something. Yeah, no, I have a pile of. I have loads of different gallnuts. I've actually got some.
Really?
So a bookbinder friend of mine, Yuda Miklaf, you would love him. Oh my God, he tells the best stories.
Okay.
Used to be a monk.
Used to be what?
I used to be a monk. Now he's an Orthodox Jew in Jerusalem with
Oh,
like
wow.
grandchildren. Yeah, and he's a
Okay.
bookbinder. And
Okay.
he made books for like the Pope and the Queen and everything. And yeah, and he tells the best stories because he's had like an amazing life.
You have to email me his contact.
Yeah, I
number.
will do. So
Yeah.
he's and he, like I said, he just tells the best stories. And it's very funny because actually last year, yeah, we discovered actually that we're distantly related,
Wow.
which is awesome.
It's a small world.
Because it's like 500 years ago related. It's like
Okay.
that. So
One of those. Okay.
So why was I telling you about him? Oh, right. So I go foraging with Jumana, and we find gallnuts. He gave me like a suitcase full of gallnuts that had been smuggled out of Persia at one point,
What?
into Israel. And he was like, "I've got loads of these. Here, have some." So then I
Wow.
brought them back to Canada. This is a long time ago. I'm sure the statute of limitations has run out. And I don't even know if it was okay for me to do that or not. I just wanted to have gallnuts. But yeah, you can get them here. They're mostly on oak. Sometimes you can find them on sumac, but they're pretty much always on oak. And they're a different variety of gallnut because like
Okay.
the Middle Eastern gallnuts are different like size and texture.
Right, it's on the Atlantic oak, isn't it? In the Middle East, or the Aleppo oak, or something.
I was going to
like
say
this.
Atlantic oak.
No, it's the
I don't know.
Atlantic. So
Atlantic?
So the oak trees in Israel
Yeah.
are very unusual because they come from the Atlantic region, and there was some kind of thing where like they were very common, widespread all over the region, and then there was a climatic change
Okay.
where the climate somehow shifted, and they were trapped there. And so there's this small region, like you'll have the
Really?
these Atlantic oaks that have no business in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they're just left over from some
Yeah.
kind of earlier climate.
Huh. That's
And
very interesting.
yeah, and they look unusual within the environment. Right?
I'm sure they do.
There aren't other trees like that around there. And
Because
you'll-
if they look like they're North American, I mean, there's different varieties of North
no,
American
they don't
oak
look
as
North
well.
American.
They look
but
English?
They look like something you would find on the western coast of Spain. Or
Oh, okay, like
something
that. Okay.
like that. I don't know exactly, but yeah, no, it's kind of this isolate that got left when there was a shift in climate.
Right. I did not know that. That's really interesting.
And so the oak tree is and they have these gallnuts. It's interesting.
On my Instagram, I show you pictures of like my different like where I bray and then where I actually like
Bray?
compound. Yeah, so braying something is to like crush it into sort of bigger pieces,
Okay.
not to like compound, not to crush it into like powder. Right.
Okay.
So I've got different size. I've actually got one that's like this massive like brass one that has
Mm-hmm.
got like Jerusalem written on it in like Amharic. I'm
Oh.
like, why? How did that
Wow.
happen? Weird,
That is weird.
Yeah, so I use the gallnuts, and the
Huh.
other thing I use is we grow grapes at our home,
Okay.
and so when I prune the grapes every year, I keep the grape wood, and then
What's the grape wood? The
like no, from the like just the branches
vine?
the vine, like so because every year you're supposed to like cut them back.
Okay.
And so I do that and I dry them, and then you can put them, you sort of put them in, it's like the fire equivalent of a double boiler. You put them in like a small can and a big can, and then you turn them into charcoal. You put them in a fire and you let them turn it, they can't burn, right? You want them to turn them into charcoal, and then that's where you get your soot from.
Really?
Instead of burning olive oil, which is another way
Really?
they use it. Yeah, so you get that. So literally vine black, the paint, is from grapevines. And then
Wait.
you would add pigment to that,
So
and
that
that is
big
vine
piece
black.
of charcoal, all of that can be used to make carbon ink?
Well, I mean,
Or is
if
it
you buy
only-
it, if you buy it in an art store, then it's usually made from willow. So I don't know
No,
how.
I'm saying what you do.
Oh yeah, what
Like you'll
yeah.
have a big chunk of because one of the things I've
It's
heard.
usually like smaller. It's smaller like sticks of it that I prune back, and then so I have the charcoal,
Mm-hmm.
and I can bray that, and then I've got the gallnuts, so I can bray that and make that into a tea and boil it down, and
So what you're
and
making
then I've got
first of
gum
all
arabic.
is a mixed ink, meaning it has carbon and what we didn't hear about iron sulfate. So it's a carbon ink. Are you putting some kind of iron source into it?
Yeah, sometimes. It depends.
Okay,
It depends on what I use it for. And I don't remember if I said this earlier, but I always give I think I did. I always give my clients the choice. I say, well, I make this ink, blah, 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 and I tell them about it. And I also buy, and the ink that I tend to like to use is Rav Nahari ink, which is a Yemenite recipe. So
we know what's in it.
Well, they're proprietary, but I can make some
Do we
guesses
know if there's
just
carbon
because
in it?
I know well, it certainly smells like vinegar. So it's
Okay.
probably like wine vinegar. It's like grape vinegar.
Do you know
probably.
the Yemenite midrash about the dogs?
The dogs?
Yeah.
No.
So when the Israelites left Egypt, the dogs didn't bark. And there's a midrash that says that the dogs were rewarded to participate in the writing of a Torah scroll because they didn't bark. And what does that mean? So they dye their skins, not of the dogs, of the animals they write on, right? Meaning not parchments, but the leather. One of the way they dye that leather is they soak it in different materials, and one of those materials involves dog feces.
Yes. Okay, I didn't know the story, but I did know that.
And so the dogs were blessed to be able to be involved in writing Torah scrolls because they didn't bark when we left Egypt.
Because they have so much tannic acid in their poo.
Well, that's a different way of looking at it as well.
This is why this is why it says in the tradition that if a woman marries a tanner, and it turns out after she has lived with him, after they got married and she's lived with him, that she cannot stand to live with him because the smell is so terrible, she can petition the court for a divorce, for a get, and he has to pay out her ketubah as well.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And both of those things quite unusual. Like a lot of times women were not even allowed to petition the court. It was really about the man giving the divorce, right? But she could actually demand a divorce from him because she thought she could take it. And this is when they were using, obviously, like dog excrement.
And who knows what else,
And the dung gate, that's, so, yeah.
Very interesting. So what I'd love to do at some point in the future is if you could send me some samples of your writing.
Yes.
Of the Yemenite stuff. I want to see it. I don't have the tool here. I have a tool that can see if there's carbon in it.
Oh, okay.
Like easily within a second, I'll know if there's carbon or not.
Oh, all right.
I won't know if there's iron compounds in it because that requires a much more sophisticated machine that costs 50,000 euros.
They are very expensive, yes.
But
they're actually gonna measure like the
the
metal
XRF,
content.
right.
Yeah.
Right. So we would have to XRF, but to see it, but I would just look at it under infrared light at 940 nanometers. You can see if there's carbon in it instantly. So that would be interesting to see if he puts carbon. And also I want to see your homemade ink, if it shows up as carbon. It should, but I don't know.
If I put soot in it, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was olive oil soot, right? And it was also grapevine soot.
Right. So it should, but maybe it doesn't.
Would use, so
that would be really interesting.
But yeah, so I go foraging with Jumana, and she's actually published a few books, like Inks and Paints of the Middle East, which you'd probably find really interesting. Because
send me that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know.
She's also just a nice person.
Mark sent me something that somebody translated. Is that her? Or it was like an Arabic work that somebody translated?
Was it Al-Talusi?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But it was really interesting.
It's probably her, yeah.
It was interesting because I had a lot of recipes. Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's her.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. This was really fun.
Yeah.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.